Hello and welcome to the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest news from the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, as well as fascinating interviews with entertainment personalities, government leaders, and community advocates. St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, where Scotland meets the City of Angels. Let's get started.
Robert Bruce, you want the one thing you cannot have. To be William Wallace. To be loved as he was. And that is why you will not become King of Scotland.
Hello and welcome to the St. Andrew's Societies of Los Angeles' podcast. I'm your host and podcast moderator, Jowanna Lewis, and today we have a great show in store for you. First, I would like to introduce to you Academy Award winner for sound mixing for the movie Whiplash, Mr. Ben Wilkins.
Hello.
And our guest today is the director of Robert the Bruce, Mr. Richard Gray. Thank you both for taking the time out to be on the show today.
Pleasure.
You're very welcome.
So I know, Ben, you have a ton of questions, and because you both are in the film industry, you were going to be the resident expert for this podcast. So take it away.
All right. Thank you for taking the time to do this, Richard. So the first question, and these are sort of, I think these were aggregated questions from a whole panel of people. But the first question is, how did this current project unfold? I mean, it's been a while since Braveheart, so this is obviously something has been in the works for a while. I mean, historically. But tell us a little bit about how this whole project came to fruition.
Yeah, so Braveheart came out, I think, when I was 15 in Australia. And Mel Gibson was a bit of a god in Australia back then. And that film was, I just started making short films, and that film was had a massive impact on me, and always been one of my favorites. It's probably the perfect age to watch that film for the first time. A friend of mine, Anna Hutchinson, who was an actress who plays the lead role in this film, Morag, she was making a film with Angus McFadden in the UK, and he was telling her about this script that he's had for a decade, Robert the Bruce. He's always wanted to continue to tell that story. And Anna, we made films in Australia and around the US, and she knew that I was quite the fan of Braveheart, so she said, you should get it to Richie. And I was scared about reading it because, the last thing you want to do is a sequel to Braveheart, which it's not. And the last thing you want to do is read something that doesn't live up to expectation. But what I was so excited about was it's a very small story, an original story, and a take on war and the people that war affects through different eyes, to see it through the eyes of the peasant family and the orphan children and the widow. So I was so happy that it wasn't trying to be anything like Braveheart and had its own original story to tell. So I read it and just fell in love with it, and I think from there it was only about 6 months till we were in production.
Wow. So from a chance encounter on a film set to having cameras and a crew and actually to be making the film, 6 months, that feels incredibly quickly. I mean, for people listening at home, you're looking at 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years. There was a whole wave of Netflix films last year that were 7 or 8 years in development. The King, a big historical, the Richard the Third, Fourth, Fifth, the sort of Shakespearean stuff like that. Another big one, another big historical piece.
I think the turnaround was because the script had been so well developed, and then Angus already had actor friends in mind for some of the roles. So Jared Harris and Kevin McNally, and then I've got a bunch of actors that I just thought were perfect for the roles. And so I think that's why we progressed. Also, it was set in the winter, and it very much needed to be for the story. And that was the other time pressure on it. It was either now or another year later. And so all those things added up. We were prepping a different film here in Montana, a Western, and that helped us as well because we're already so far along with locations. But Montana was actually necessary to be able to make the film because of the tight turnaround, and also my crew being largely American. So, but that was a really determining factor, because if Montana couldn't look like Scotland, then we couldn't make the film. We brought on Shores Wallace, who is a historian and was in Braveheart, and he's a stunt coordinator as well. And so we would send him pictures of Montana, and he would go, "Oh, that could be Glencoe, and here's this area outside Stirling, and here's this part of Isle of Skye," and we would send him back pictures, and it was really remarkable, down to the stone that's in the ground. It was really remarkable how similar Montana could look to Scotland.
Good. Yes, I have to say, as a cynical sort of film worker and observer, I did look at it, and my immediate reaction was, "Oh wow, this is Europe somewhere." It felt like, I thought, "Oh, maybe it's Bulgaria or Czechoslovakia or somewhere." But that's fascinating that that was all a domestic or all American anyway. No, so there was never any chance of you filming it in Australia?
No, but the Barrier Reef version would have been nice, like my shirt. But but no, and we were lucky enough because Montana winters are hideous. But back where we were setting this film in the Highlands, the snow was a really good thing. And then we went to Scotland to film for a few weeks, and it was during the Beast from the East storm.
Oh.
And so, which most people would say, "Oh, that's terrible," but for us, it was perfect. And so when you see the start of the film and the very end of the film, that's Isle of Skye during the Beast from the East, and it really made everything kind of fit and feel like the same movie.
Cool. So I couldn't think of any. This is a little off topic. I couldn't think of any other, apart from John Wick and the Star Wars films, where an actor and a character moves from one film to another with a whole different set of problems and production people. But moving on to my next question, the sort of contrast between Robert the Bruce in the first film, where he was very much the villain of the piece, and now he's very much the hero of the piece, and actually sort of he turned from this traitorous person to this sort of hunted terrorist. How was that? I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, so the history thing was our guiding light, and of course Braveheart took a lot of creative choices, which I have no problem with. It's a movie. And Braveheart did such wonderful things for Scotland in many, many, many ways. But if you remember the end of Braveheart, it's Robert the Bruce riding into Bannockburn with these handkerchief from William Wallace, and so we know, well, from history, this is Scotland's greatest ever king, and so it was bridging that gap. And with 25 years, obviously the age is a factor and something we really had to consider. But because our Robert the Bruce starts our film so broken, because he was seen as a loser king, losing battles and battles and battles and battles before Bannockburn, it kind of worked that he was this broken down guy. And it also worked that we were telling the story through the eyes of people who had fought for him and lost for him, and it weighed so heavily on him. Also, we're interested in telling the story of Scots versus Scots. It didn't need to be an English versus a Scottish thing. The interclan rivalries that exist today is what I found incredibly interesting, and also not stories that have been told much. To have this guy on the run in areas where he was not supported, where they supported the common, was just more and more reason to like the script and take it on a different path. And then we connect with him right through the end of the film to the lead up to Bannockburn again. So we're almost becoming this little tiny little Rogue One bit to fit, to connect the pieces. And we look forward to continuing to do that. There's so many more stories to tell.
The this could be a product of the time, but the role of your sort of the female characters, again, this is based on history and true events. But it seemed to me that the women, the sort of strong Scottish woman stereotype was much more sort of present in this thing, and that there was much more of a feminist sort of bent to this.
That was such an attraction. Like, when do you see a film like this and you're concentrating on who was staying at home and what their loss was? And it was so, to see Ivor, the young daughter, and Scott and Carney, and to focus on what was happening at the farm in the croft was so interesting and different. And then Robert the Bruce learning to care and love again, seeing it through the eyes of their sacrifice. And he's ready to let it all go. But then when he sees what he's lost, well, their loss would be worth nothing if he didn't do what he was supposed to do. It's also how we could make the film in such a short amount of time on a limited budget, and why it's really special that people have been able to see it. And it shows also the popularity of these Scottish legends. But yeah, to answer your question quickly, that was a massive draw. Also, to not have the typical sexual attraction between the peasant woman that you would expect to happen and the king. We didn't need to invent an affair with the Princess of Wales or the film didn't need it, I don't think. And it wasn't about that. It was just about a strong woman convincing the broken king that he still needs to lead.
I appreciated there not being that forced romance, because for a minute there I thought, oh, they're not going to do that, are they? And then when it didn't happen, I was overjoyed.
That's great. Yeah, that was a big, big plus. And Anna brought so much to the table in that role, as did the kids. Talitha and Gabriel are actually brother and sister, which was great because you get the bickering for free. And you get and that brother and sister relationship, along with Carney, the older brother, we thought worked really well. And the cold only helped us bond because it was so cold. It was average temperature is about 9 degrees Fahrenheit. I can't remember what that is Celsius, but it's cold. And although there were interiors, we're never really interior because we're just in a croft. None of it was studio, and there's no windows. So it was freezing, but it helped the film. We were worried about snow continuity, and we didn't need to worry about that. And but we saved a lot of money with VFX because we didn't need to provide any of the vapor.
I was going to say, when I was watching that, I'm like, blimey, there's a lot of, they've added a lot of breath here. And then eventually I was like, oh, I think it's real. But that was good.
There's that one scene when Robert the Bruce is first in the house,
yes,
in the farm, and they all go out by the fire to talk to him, and that was blizzard, but it looks so authentic. And John Garrett, the cinematographer, did quite a phenomenal role in the conditions because to take care of the lenses and have the equipment operating in those conditions was really some kind of effort. We would drive out to set, at 5 a.m. in pitch black, and we'd get to the point in the road where we'd have to put the chains on every morning. And we would be under the car. We'd kind of be racing to get it done because it was so cold. And we'd have our iPhone lights on trying to chain up the car. And I'm Australian, so I'm not the best at snow chains. And literally the first thing we would say to each other would be under the car. We'd just say, basically, fuck you to each other. And then that was how we started the day, every day. And then we'd get to set, we'd get a coffee, and then we'd slowly warm up. And then we get going.
That is funny.
So you're Australian, obviously, but you have some connection to Scotland or to Scottish heritage in some way.
Yeah, strong Celtic. So my mother's side they're from Tipperary, and my father's side is from Glasgow, and they actually came to America, to Washington State, and I have a bunch of Scottish family up in that Spokane region, North Washington.
Nice.
And so I've been lucky enough to go to Scotland a lot. And so, like I was saying before, that was our number one fear. Like, could we pull it off here? But there's such an amazing Scottish contingency and heritage up here, and obviously in Canada as well. So we're surprised just how many Scots are up here in the Northwest.
I'm constantly amazed by. For a long time, I would meet a lot of Irish people in America, but actually through St Andrews, I am meeting a lot more Scots in Los Angeles, definitely. So I mean, I wasn't trying to, but I couldn't sort of pinpoint any particular style or influence or sort of directorial direction you were going in. But who, if you had to pick, I know it's a horrible, difficult question. Who were your biggest directorial influences?
This one was dictated on the conditions, and we found out very early on that the shot list and the storyboards that we had were not going to work day to day, and if we couldn't keep a constant theme or mood, it would be stupid. So we decided that we would just observe a lot more and let the weather and the characters, just do their thing, which worked really well because the fly on the wall in this type scenario worked really well, and the locations are so spectacular. We didn't, and even if we wanted to, couldn't get too fancy with the camera. But my influences growing up, George Miller, being Australian, George Miller was, we watched those films. And then, Scorsese was a big.
Sorry for the audience at home. We're talking about the Mad Max films, the modern one and the original Road Warrior. It's called the Road Warrior in America for some reason, but really dubbed.
Those films were made. The first two were made, an hour from my house, just in rural parts of Victoria, Australia, and it was kind of fantastic to grow up thinking, okay, so that was just made there, and then you had people like Peter Weir and Bruce Beresford and all these filmmakers, Australian filmmakers in the 70s and 80s was a great leap, jumping pad for us young directors, as were the talent coming over in the acting stakes. And so we've always been very blessed with representation, which gives Australia, you always had an opportunity to have a meeting as a director because it's, just like as an actor, because there's a history there. But then Scorsese was a massive influence on me. But growing up in suburban Australia, you look for your own voice. And it was actually Paul Thomas Anderson that showed us that you could tell that type of story in suburban LA. And so when I was watching Boogie Nights, which I think came out when I was 17, that was like, oh, wow. So you can do Goodfellas, but you can keep it in your own world. And then Magnolia. And so that was a massive influence on me, not so much with style, just with giving confidence that your own stories are enough. So that would be the people that I would, and obviously, growing up in the 80s, pretty hard to go past Spielberg and these type of guys, because those films, when I was watching, E.T. in these types of movies, they were very, very inspirational. And so, yeah, and not to mention Mel Gibson, Mel Gibson, Apocalypto is such an underrated, well, maybe not underrated, but it's such a brilliant film to go from a Braveheart to the Passion of the Christ to an Apocalypto. That was pretty inspiring as well.
Just personal, Mel Gibson was one of the first sort of real movie stars that I was in close proximity to. And like early 90s, he did a couple of really gritty sort of gangster films. He was, I mean, just anyway, I got nothing.
No, you're right. And, he's so generous with DVD commentaries. Like if you watch the Braveheart commentary, he's talking about Richard Donner and he's talking about what he learned in Lethal Weapon. He's talking about how George Miller taught him how to cut frames to make the impact of the sword more. And he's so generous with, as is Paul Thomas Anderson in early commentaries when he made them. I find, although I went to film school, I'd find you would learn a hell of a lot from those commentary tracks. And when you learn that everybody's stealing and borrowing from everybody else, it kind of makes you feel better about yourself.
Yes, you're the director's commentaries are your postgrad studies.
Exactly, exactly.
So I know we're up against the clock a little bit. So what are you? So you're in Montana currently. I'm assuming you're in pre-production on something, or you have another project in the works. I mean, it's a strange time to be doing anything. But what are you up to right now?
So we're developing a James Douglas movie because Robert the Bruce has been very successful, and it showed us that there's an audience there, and James Douglas really needs his own film.
Okay.
And so, and his relationship with Robert the Bruce is legendary, and there's so much more to tell there on a bigger scale than Robert the Bruce. But so we're working on that, but we've also built a Western town here called Yellowstone Film Ranch, which you can find on Instagram. It's only 45 minutes from Yellowstone, and it's the area and land where we shot Robert the Bruce. Very lucky to have executive producer Carter Bain, who was the driving force to bring Robert the Bruce to Montana, only if it could look like Scotland, because we didn't want to look like idiots. And we're very happy that at the Glasgow screening, like, people couldn't pick which was where, and that helped us to believe. And of course, the snow helps. But when you're traveling through Glencoe, you could be traveling 20 minutes from here, and you wouldn't be able to pick the difference down to the color of the rocks, like I said before. So we're making a Western, which was the Western that we set out to make before Robert the Bruce. It's just the timing, like you said, is hardcore at the moment. But thankfully, Montana hasn't been too badly touched by the virus, touch wood. And so it's always been a dream of mine to make a Western, and now we have a town to be able to do that. Montana's a pretty safe place right now. So, with a bit of luck, we'll make a Western later this year, and then we'll move into James Douglas in the new year.
Robert the Bruce, it was released. I watched it on iTunes, but what was the original plan? Was it theatrical? You said you had a screening in Glasgow. Yeah,
it was pretty heartbreaking. We had 600 screens lined up, and the film was clearly shot for the theater. But the silver lining was so many more people have been able to see it because we haven't been competing against massive studio product. And so, although it was heartbreaking not to have our LA and New York premieres and have our theatrical, and we're also going to be released, Braveheart was going to have a 25th anniversary, and they agreed to play our trailer at the front of Braveheart, which was such a beautiful thing for them to do. They had to watch the film and approve it. And so we lost all of that. But the great thing was our distributor, Screen Media, did a fantastic job of getting us out there. And we were the number one independent film for a bunch of weeks. And then once you have that presence on the iTunes and the Amazon, it tends to just start to fulfill itself. And it's what, as you know, it's what an indie film needs to not just be buried. Because once you have to start typing in the full title, you've lost 90% of your audience that just likes to flick through Netflix and find the picture that they like. So the virus ended up being quite fortunate for the film's release, because there's just no way an indie film can compete with studio product that has the placement that they have and pay for. Yeah. So in that sense, it was great because as a filmmaker, you just want maximum eyeballs. The ego of the theater is beautiful, but if it means 1 million more people can watch it at home than they would have otherwise, then I'll take that every time.
So your next project, what if you were a betting man, what do you think about a theatrical release? I mean, we're looking at 12 months, 18 months down the line?
I don't see in the US the theaters being a factor next year either. It's one thing to say that you have a vaccine. It's who's going to be the first to get it. Maybe you can be the first and let us know how it goes.
I think they should. I think they should give it out free with popcorn. I think if you go and see a movie on a Friday night, you should get a free vaccination.
So I think it's a new world, and you see so many people buying home projectors and just bettering their home experience.
Yeah.
And even if it's at reduced capacity, I just can't see cinemas bouncing back next year. And so it is a new world to consider all those things. It's sad. It's incredibly sad. But I think we'd be naive to think that it's going to be business as usual next year.
Yes, that's wishful thinking. Drive-ins are making a bit of a resurgence. I believe in Montana or Wyoming is the world's only drive-in motel where you can, they have speakers in the room and a giant projection screen outside the hotel, and you open your curtains and lie in bed and can watch the film. All the motel rooms are facing the screen.
I love it. I've heard of that. And they're actually the Bozeman, where you fly into here where I am, has just reopened their drive-in theater. And Carter, the executive producer I mentioned, his family used to run the drive-in here in Livingston. And so there's been a lot of talk about that. And actually they want to play Robert the Bruce next week, which I'm all for, because with the kids, it's fantastic to take, a carload. And I miss the drive-in. Like, it used to be such an awesome thing. So that there, like you said, there are some positives.
I was lucky enough to go to the last drive-in in LA, which was, when I just got to America, but Terminator 2.
Wow.
On the bill. Terminator 2 and Pet Sematary, double bill.
Judgment Day. That is a classic.
All through a tiny little metal speaker hanging on my car window, but still it was...
for a sound person... How do you go with the drive-in?
Well, nowadays it's good. And actually, I did buy all the equipment myself to test it. So I have an FM. I can do my own drive-in because we did a drive-in premiere. I just did it as a favor to someone. We have big theatrical projectors here. I'm able to borrow.
Right.
But it is tough, and but the new technology is using FM transmitters. So actually, you've got a really good stereo signal in your car. So it's a lot better than it was, but those speaker boxes that used to hang on were kind of always a... So
these days, if your car audio setup is good,
I would actually expect some people to be able to turn their stereo up so loud you sort of feel explosions and hear stuff outside. I haven't been around to test it much. A friend was doing production at the Rose Bowl. They did a drive-in film there, and then they had actually live stand-up as well. That's in Pasadena in California. And I think it went very well. But it's I think what all the venues have realized is unless you're set up to have that level of sort of distancing, it's not possible to make any money. You have to have it figured out beforehand. It's just like restaurants having a tenth of the normal customers. It doesn't work.
No, and they're already on such a knife edge already.
Yeah. I mean, I could see movie theaters maybe doing private rentals where you have a pool of people that are safe and not infected, and they would rent a whole room for themselves, and maybe do a streaming model where, we'd like to watch Robert the Bruce. Okay, let's get 12 mates together and we'll rent a theater and we'll all pay, $10 and we'll see it. I could see that maybe like boutique screening rooms becoming a thing where you go in and just use your phone and choose any film you want. That could happen. Yeah, but I know that all the theaters are pivoting. There's a bigger problem in that the center of cities are becoming empty now. So these suburban theater chains will be okay, but the big theaters in the middle of town, I don't think they're going to have any customers for a while.
No, it's sad, but there's a new model there to be had. And so it's just going to be how quickly people can pivot, I guess.
Yes. Well, pivoting like doing podcasts.
Yes.
it's a decent... Yeah, the Zoom recordings. Yeah, we're doing video as well. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
That's my hair. Well, Richard Gray, director of Robert the Bruce, available on all fine streaming platforms now. Please run out and rent it once or twice. I nearly rented... I also found... I nearly went back and watched one of your last film was also available on streaming. That was a horror film?
Yeah, there's a couple. So Sugar Mountain I made up in Alaska with Carrie Elways and Jason Momoa, which was fun. It was cold as well. And then we made a tiny little coming-of-age film called Broken Ghost. That was my introduction to Montana when I fell in love with it. And that was a few years back. And then Robert the Bruce now. We've been surprised just how many DVDs are moving on Redbox and Walmart because I guess that's another thing that you don't really expect anymore. And it might be that we have an older audience, but it might just be also that everybody's looking for ways to watch it at home. And, I'd much prefer to watch a Blu-ray when it's possible.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we all like that. I mean, I think physical media, the Academy's stopping physical screeners this year. I think it's the last year. It's a bit of a shame. Christopher Nolan and certain people still insisted on sending out Blu-rays, and that was nice. But yeah, there is an element of that. It's like when MP3s came in. Streaming is here, but I think the quality is getting there. Apple are actually, I've got friends with Apple, and they're dealing with how to get Atmos working on your phone and on your headphones, and that'll be a big step up in terms of your home experience, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One last question. What gives you the right to call yourself an Australian film director? You're as far as I can tell, you're an American film director now.
That sounds like shots fired.
You must be a Scottish film director. No, but what I'm saying is, it seems like, like me, I'm English, but I consider myself an American sound guy.
Sure.
Because I've done the bulk of my work here. So I guess it's welcome to America is what I'm saying.
No, it's just like you, man. So I've been here for 10 years, and my kids are American, and you just go where the work is. I've been lucky enough to go back and make a couple of films in Australia.
Oh, great.
But it's tough, and you're always looking for more stories, and Australia has amazing incentives, so it's only ever a matter of time. But after 10 years in LA, being up here in Montana is a nice escape, and particularly with the current timing.
Yeah, I'm the only person stuck in LA, I think. It's a factory town. We're here for the work.
Exactly.
But the industry's still based. There's still, the factories are still here as slow as they are.
Yeah.
But well, good for you. Congratulations. Well, congratulations on Robert the Bruce and on your two upcoming projects. It sounds like. What are they again? There's the Cowboy project, the Western.
We've got a Western, and we're working on a couple of different scripts for James Douglas.
Great.
Different storylines.
Fantastic. Well, we'll all look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Thank you guys for taking the time out to sit down with the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast and videocast. Richard, is there a website where people can hear about your new projects, find out about upcoming things, also to see where they can download or rent Robert the Bruce?
Yeah, and thank you to St. Andrews, who've been incredibly supportive of Robert the Bruce for the entire campaign. And you can get, whether it's Amazon, Google, iTunes, wherever you want to find Robert the Bruce, it's available to rent and purchase. Walmart, Best Buy, Redbox, everything. And then for us to see what we're building up here in Montana, you could check out Yellowstone Film Ranch on Instagram to see. It's a 28-building 1880s Western town that we've built in Paradise Valley here. So it's a dream come true. So if you want to check that out, that's where you'll find me.
All right. Well, thank you. And Ben, thank you so much for being our show moderator, like co-host. I really appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
You guys have had a chance to now finally meet.
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
And nice to meet you, Jowanna.
Thank you. It was great meeting both of you. This has been the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles' podcast. Tune in next time for new guests, new moderators, new topics. Thank you, guys.
See you guys.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles podcast. For more information on the St. Andrew's Society of Los Angeles, visit www.standrewsla.org. And don't forget to like our Facebook page, Instagram, and YouTube channels as well. Have a great week, and we'll see you next episode.